Program starts in 5 minutes. The program starts in 1 minute. The program starts now.
Hello, everyone. A warm welcome and thank you for joining us today from all over the world. This is Rajani from Train and Shine team Hyderabad Runners. Hyderabad Runners is a non-profit running group, the creator and the organizer of the city's only full marathon, Airtel Hyderabad Marathon, also popularly known as AHM. Our vision has always been to promote running, fitness, and active lifestyles through hundreds of our mentors and ambassadors all over the city and outside too. Couch to 5K for helping beginners run, outdoor kids program to catch them young and fit, year-long fitness training session at Train and Shine are just some of our key initiatives in this regard. Runners or non-runners, these COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 times are going to be tough for all of us. Maintaining emotional and physical health during these crisis times can be a challenge. So many questions regarding how to stay healthy are coming up, and many have no idea whom to ask. In these turbulent times, we bring you Beyond the Track, a 1 hour live webinar series of conversations with some of our highly distinguished experts from running and sports field to help you all equip yourself with both theoretical knowledge as well as practical training. In this fourth edition of Beyond the Track, we are honored to connect you to Professor Jonathan Gil Harris, founding dean of Ashoka University. Let me quickly remind you all once again by requesting patience from all in case of any network issues. We will do our best to make this a smooth learning experience for you all. Also, we have some questions already you have sent to us to ask our speaker. Request others to post your questions in the comments section of this video and we will get them answered to the best of our ability. Without further ado, I would like to invite Gupta Kandula, Secretary of Hyderabad Runners, to introduce and welcome our speaker for today. Over to you, Gupta.
Thank you, Rajni. A very warm welcome to all the runners on your favorite Saturday show, Beyond the Track webinars. We have been hosting quite some wonderful personalities every weekend, and this week it's an honor to introduce Professor Jonathan Gil Harris, who is a writer and runner based in Delhi. Born in New Zealand, educated in the UK, and a resident of the US for 20 years, before moving to India in 2011, he's been running in India and has become a Dil Se Desi. He is currently a professor and chair of English at Ashoka University in India, where he also served as founding dean from 2013 to 17. The past president of the Shakespeare Society of India, he has published 10 books on Shakespeare and other topics, especially on the theme of migration. Since moving to India, he has also developed a deep fascination for Indian cinema, which he has written about in a series of articles for publications such as the Hindustan Times, Hindu, Indian Express, and the Outlook. Professor Harris is the author of the best-selling book, The First Firengis, Remarkable Stories of Healers, Heroes, Courtesans, Charlatans, and Other Foreigners Who Became Indian. His most recent book is Masala Shakespeare, How a Ferengi Writer Became Indian. He is currently working on a new book called The Jewish Silk Road from Europe to China and India. Professor Harris is a seasoned road runner who has completed marathons and half marathons in many parts of the world. Though his travel profile may suggest otherwise, he's interested less in racing and PBs than in getting to know the cities by mapping them on foot. This has become a challenge in the age of COVID, sadly. His most recent half marathon, completed in April during lockdown, consisted of a staggering 214 loops of his house in Delhi. But in these dark times, even running round and round in circles is a progress of a kind. With this, I welcome Professor Harris to take on the stage. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you so much, Gupta, and thank you everyone for having me here. I'm just going to share my screen so I can get a presentation up and running for you. So my talk today is called Getting Outside, the Ecstasy of Running. And you may have some questions about what this title means. It, at first glance, might seem like a fairly banal exhortation to just get out of your house and enjoy running. And to a certain extent, yes, that's what it means. But I'm talking about something quite different. And I'm approaching the idea of getting outside from a variety of angles. But to give you a hint of how I'll be thinking about it, I am an English professor after all, so it's very hard for me not to think about the meanings of words and the etymologies of words. Ecstasy comes from an ancient Greek word, ekstasis, which is often translated as meaning standing outside oneself. But more literally, it means something more like outside the self. Ek and stasis mean outside and the place where one is. Getting outside one's place, getting outside oneself is very much what I'm talking about today. Now, I must admit, I felt a certain amount of trepidation when I was asked to do this webinar. It was mentioned in the introduction that the Hyderabad Runners series involves experts in the field of running coming to talk with you, and I'm anything but. I'm actually quite an average, mediocre runner. But I hope that what I have to say on the basis of my experience as a runner might be in some way helpful, even illuminating for you. Now, who am I? I am a runner. I run half marathons. Here you see me in a state of agony, lurching towards a finishing line in the recent Delhi half marathon. I've also run a marathon in Stockholm. Here I am lurching towards a finishing line in even more agony. And one thing you'll notice about both these pictures is what's in my left hand. It's my phone. I carry it with me wherever I go when I'm running, and not because I'm expecting calls, although I've been known to take calls while running. It's rather that my phone is my connection to Strava, the app that I use in order to record my experiences of getting outside and running around. And I'm very active on Strava, as those who know me and following me on Strava painfully aware at times. I take lots of photos. I illustrate every run with a photograph. And I'm perhaps like any other Strava nerd. I'm totally enthralled to the data that it captures. I fuss over how many kilometers I'm doing a week, my pace, my cadence, etc. But I also have a critique of Strava, because the dimensionalities of Strava are anything but about getting outside. This may seem strange because Strava, of course, records our journeys outside running. And Strava purports to be a form of social media, so it seems to connect us with other people. But when you stop to think about it, Strava really pushes us inside ourselves. So one thing that Strava has made me even more obsessed about ever since I got on it is this phenomenon that we call the PB, the personal best. Now, not only do users of Strava often talk about, share about, boast about their personal bests, but Strava is always reminding you whether a certain run you've done is amongst your personal best. So, for example, fairly recently I did a 10K time trial, which was a personal best at the 10K level, at the 5K level. There it is, illustrated with a gleaming gold medal and a silver medal for something else. I think I did my second best 1K. And it encourages us to think not only about personal bests, but also my accomplishments, my speed, my pace, my splits. In other words, like virtually every other form of so-called social media, Strava is very much about me, me, me. I would even go so far as to say that Strava excessively individualizes the experience of running. Yes, you can record the runs that you've taken with other people, but by and large, Strava, like so many other social media phenomena in this day and age, is all about, as they say, curating the self, curating me. And this applies just as much to those wonderful maps that Strava allows us to produce. The red line of the Strava map is something that we've got very used to, illustrating the trajectory that we've taken in the course of a run. Sometimes these trajectories can look very strange indeed. And Gupta mentioned in his introductory remarks, how I recently ran a half marathon, or the equivalent of a half marathon, in the early days of the lockdown. I was driven crazy by a rather overzealous RWA, Resident Welfare Association edict, that we were not allowed outside the gates of our houses. I had figured that it might be at least safe and even advisable for us to walk within the colony streets for the sake of our physical and mental well-being, but no, the RWA wasn't keen on this at all. So in a fit of pique, I ran around and around my house 214 loops, and there's the illustration of it, what looks like a red steel wool spitball. Now, of course, I'm sharing this with you not to boast about running a half marathon in difficult conditions, but just to point out that the map here can't begin to capture the experience of a run. The map basically tells us how we have moved from point A to point B over space and over time. But this map can't tell you how difficult it was to run a 100-meter loop around a house, running over fallen leaves that hadn't been raked for a couple of weeks, tripping over wires, running up and down steps, bouncing off the edges of my house, cutting myself on the sharp edge of a doorway, all sorts of experiences that are simply not captured in the Strava map. Because the fact is, when we get outside, we're not just running from point A to point B. When we move through space, we are moving through an environment. And when we move through an environment, we are both acting on that environment and being acted on by it. I've deliberately picked this picture because compared to the single red line of the Strava map, my running route here consists of 6 lines of very different colors, a rainbow that also reflects a rainbow in the sky. I took this picture while running in New Zealand about 1.5 years ago. It's a running track in West Auckland, imaginatively called the Rainbow Track. New Zealanders are very good at naming things in very literal fashion. There are 2 big islands in New Zealand, so the one in the north is called the North Island, the one in the south is called the South Island. There's a bridge over the harbour in Auckland that is called the Harbour Bridge. So this Rainbow Track is called the Rainbow Track. But running on the Rainbow Track is about far more than simply running on a track, as I hope this photo captures. On the left, you'll see blue sky. On the right, you'll see stormy clouds. And this is typical of the New Zealand climate. In New Zealand, in the course of even 1 hour, the weather can change drastically. There's a famous song by New Zealand group Crowded House. Some of you may have heard of them. Some of you may have heard the song. It's called 4 Seasons in One Day. Anyone who's grown up in New Zealand know that that's not simply a metaphor. That is the reality of the weather. And as a runner, you are constantly bracing yourself for climate change, not in the apocalyptic sense we associate with that phrase, but with the minute-by-minute reality of a world in which the environment is constantly doing things that you can't quite predict, other than the fact that it's unpredictable. On the day of this particular run, it started off hot, sunny, cloudless. Half an hour into the run, suddenly I was caught in a torrential rainstorm. The temperature had dropped about 12 degrees. My reward was I got this wonderful rainbow captured over the Rainbow Track. But this picture is meant to serve as a reminder that the environment isn't simply some sort of passive backdrop when we're running. It's something that surrounds, engulfs us. We are running at its permission. We like to think of ourselves as humans, as having mastery of a kind. Running offers an illusion of mastery over speed, over terrain, but we are just as much mastered, overcome by the environments that we run through. When you grow up in New Zealand, this is something you can never escape. I was born and raised in the city of Auckland, which, even though it's the biggest city in the country, we're talking about a pretty small country. It has a population of 4.5 million, which is even less than Gurgaon, about half the size, I believe, of the population of Hyderabad. Auckland has a population of 2 million. And it is, at least to Indian eyes, very, very empty. But it's a city that invites you outdoors to run. The terrain is spectacular. It's also slightly intimidating terrain. Auckland is built on an isthmus full of volcanoes. Most of them, are extinct. There are a few that are still dormant. And here I am running on a lava field next to Waitemata Harbour, Auckland's main harbour, across from a dormant volcano, Rangitoto, which last erupted about 500 years ago. The thing is, when you're running in Auckland, in fact, when you're running anywhere in New Zealand, you never know exactly what the environment is going to do. Living in New Zealand means constantly resigning yourself to the fact that there might be an earthquake any day. There might be a volcanic eruption. Once again, it's a reminder that the environment is never simply a backdrop that you take for granted. Even as you move through it and transform it by virtue of where you plant your foot, how you exhale, what you're using during your run, even whether you're using a hydration pack or carrying a bottle of water, throwing it away is a big no-no in New Zealand, which has very absolute policies about no littering. Can you imagine what a shock it was to me migrating from New Zealand to India? But this kind of terrain is again a reminder of how much the environment is something much bigger than us, that we are running in at its permission. Here's a picture that I snapped on a recent run at the top of Auckland's tallest volcano, Mount Eden. Mount Eden last erupted probably about 20,000 years ago, so there's not too much fear that it's going to blow its stack while you're running on it. But there's something about this picture that really captures the experience of running in Auckland for me. When you run up a volcano, of course, it's a completely different exertion from road running on the flat. And not just because you are running at a gradient up a steep hill. There is something about being exposed to the elements at the top of a hill. At the bottom, everything might be still, but once you're at the top, the wind is blowing very quickly. The clouds are often just a few hundred feet above your heads and moving very quickly. And at a moment like this, when the sun is setting, you're reminded of the fact that even though the environment may seem to be something solid, fixed, unchanging, a series of landmarks that can be mapped, captured on Strava or Google Maps, in fact, the environment is constantly changing. And so are you in the environment. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus said you can never step in the same river twice because the river changes from second to second. That's true not only of rivers, but of the landscape through which we run. Slowly, according to its own timeline, a timeline that we're often indifferent to, at the same time as it is indifferent to our own timelines. The environment is changing, and running can bring you face to face with the fact of that change, the inescapability of change. Now, over the years, since moving from New Zealand first to Europe, then to America, and then to India. I've run in many parts of the world, and I've carried with me wherever I've gone this New Zealander's sense that I'm very much running at the mercy of the environment. It's hard, of course, not to forget that when you run in a place like Göttingen in December, Göttingen in Germany, depicted here. You may not realize it from this photograph, but the river I'm running over is totally frozen because it was minus 10 degrees that day. Having to adapt to that level of cold while you're running makes you realize that your body is not something fixed. It is having to constantly adjust to the immediate environment. Your lungs change with the air that it inhales. Running in Tokyo at the height of summer, when it's 38 degrees and humid, helped me learn to understand that city in a way that I might not otherwise have done. It was one of the most sapping experiences I've had running in that high humidity. I've got to say it was even tougher than running in Delhi in summer. And it was tougher partly because I chose to run around the absolutely beautiful Imperial Gardens in the center of Tokyo. Now, not only are these gardens very hilly, surrounding the old walled Imperial Palace, but they are completely full of joggers who run at improbably brisk speeds. In fact, you can't call it jogging at all. These people are doing, for their easy runs, 5-minute kilometers and below, in 38 degrees and 100% humidity. But I think the most instructive place I've run in is a shrine in Kyoto called the Fushimi Inari Taika Shrine. Now, I'm not normally a big fan of religious places. I'm glad they exist. I'm happy that people go to them. But what happens in religious places, I think by and large, needs to stay in religious places. So you won't normally find me going to a shrine or a temple or a masjid where there's an active service happening. I respect the right of people to practice their own faith, but I hope that people will respect my own right to do my own thing. But this shrine was something else. This was a shrine that I could really believe in, because the shrine is physically very different from anything else I've ever seen. And indeed, the spiritual practice that one conducts in it is completely different from anything I'd seen before. The Fushimi Inari Shrine is dedicated to an old Japanese Shinto god named Taika, who looks after basically business of any kind, commerce of any kind. And it's distinguished by these orange arches called tori that are donated by Japanese businessmen. But the spiritual practice that the shrine demands is not just the donation of orange shrines, but movement through a 4-kilometer trail that leads up a mountain full of cedars. And the mountain is at times very, very steep. Now, if you just concentrate on running in a straight line, as the Strava map might encourage you to do, then all you'll see is this admittedly gorgeous orange corridor of arches, or tori, as they're called in Japanese. But you always have the option, pardon me, of pausing between these arches and looking to the left and the right to see what's in the gaps between them, i.e. this extraordinary environment of cedar forest, of mountainscape. And it's no accident that the presiding, not deity, but spirit guardian in the shrine is a fox messenger, That's what they call it, a fox messenger that moves between different realms, the realm of the gods and the realm of humans, the realm of the self and the realm of nature. The fox messenger, spirit guardian, is meant to draw you out of yourself, across borders, into a larger sense of a world that is much, much bigger than you. In other words, the spiritual practice, which leads you eventually to the sanctum at the top of the mountain, it is designed to make you aware that the self is something fundamentally constraining and limited, that the only spiritual practice worthy of that name is one that crosses boundaries rather than stays firmly embedded within them. As a result, I've become increasingly interested in running on international sites that are spiritual of some kind, but that don't necessarily have active services going on. And here's an example. This is a site from Luxor in Egypt. This is the old Sun Temple. And running next to this temple, this was a 10-kilometer run I did in September of 2018, was an extraordinary experience, not unlike the experience of running up the Fushimi Inari Taika Shrine Trail. What you can't see in this picture is what's immediately behind me when I took this photo, which is the Nile River. You can't hear something that was evident to me as I was running. That's the sound of the Nile. It's a gentle, omnipresent roar as the waters, and remember the Nile is not only the longest river in the world, it is huge. From the Aswan Dam down to the Mediterranean, the Nile is constantly transporting an unbelievable volume of water. Now, the people who went to worship at the Luxor Sun Temple, first thing in the morning, would watch this miracle of the sun rising over the temple, just as we see here, against a backdrop of the roar of the Nile. That roar must have been something a little bit frightening, overwhelming, yet at the same time comforting, because it was the Nile that ensured in this desert habitat the miracle of life could happen. It was as a result of the Nile, of course, that people had water, drinking water, bathing water, but most importantly, water to nourish their crops. For 1 mile on either side of the Nile, you had the luscious terrain. It looks like Kerala. Beyond that mile, you are suddenly in the most parched desert terrain. And the Luxor temple is sort of right at that intermediate spot. It seems to me that what the temple is designed to do is make you aware of those boundaries between night and day, between desert and fertility, between river and land, between life and death. Crossing those boundaries are crucial in getting outside the self in order to recognize how life is in fact a very intricate but also fragile web that one has to be thankful for. Running has helped me in that regard. Here is another spiritual place that I've run around. It's the Kalyan Mosque in Bukhara, in what is now Uzbekistan. Now, if you approach Bukhara simply by car, it can be a complete mess, because Bukhara, like many old Central Asian cities, is a bulbulaya, a labyrinth of tiny winding streets that a big Range Rover can easily get stuck in. You don't get to see much of the city by driving in its streets, let alone by avoiding the old city and driving on the old Soviet highways that run a ring around the old city. It was only through running in the city that I acquired a sense of what Bukhara was all about. Bukhara is, on the one hand, an oasis city. in the middle of a desert. On the other hand, the Kalyan Mosque and the complex that it's built in tells us something about how the Bukharans related to the larger environment of the desert. Look at the colors here. And remember, people would come here to do namaz just before sunrise. And what we would get is a light show, not just the light show of modern technology that lights up the minaret here, but a light show that would come from the daily miracle of the sun striking the tiles on the faces of the masjid and the domes, as well as the minaret. Look at what the two principal colors are. Sandstone color and blue. The colors, in other words, of the desert. When people went to do namaz at the Kalyan Mosque, they were not thinking of themselves as members of a gated community, an oasis cut off from the desert. They were thinking of themselves as part of the desert, open to the desert, a little bit in awe of the desert, its majesty, its danger, the risks it posed, but also grateful for the opportunity to work with the desert in order to sustain themselves. Now, this is the spiritual venue that for me has perhaps meant the most in my running career. This is also in Uzbekistan, down the road from Bukhara. This is in Samarkand. This is a complex called the Registan, which of course means, as it does in Hindi Urdu, it means in Tajik Persian, desert. And this is a complex literally made out of the desert, like the Kalyan Mosque in Bukhara. It's in fact a madrasa complex. Now, for many modern people, especially in an increasingly Islamophobic age, the word madrasa might signify fundamentalism, religious bigotry. Nothing could be further from the truth. This madrasa, like so many madrasas in the Persian and Arab world of this period, it was built from about 1500 to 1650, was what we would now call a liberal arts university. These were seats of multidisciplinary learning. So many subjects were studied here, and huge advances in human knowledge were achieved here. In this madrasa, for instance, significant breakthroughs in astronomy, philosophy, medicine, history, poetry were all achieved by students studying all these disciplines. Now, running around this complex may be understood how the people who inhabited it understood their education. If you look at the right, you'll see that there is a sort of wonderful crenellated dome behind the madrasa frontispiece and the two minarets. Let's look more closely there. That's how it looks from the side. It's an absolutely stunning piece of architecture. But as you look more closely, and this is what I realized as I was running around it, there's something that went against the grain of my assumption about what a Muslim building would look like. Because you can see immediately above the archway, the big arch, something that seems to go against the grain of the hardcore Orthodox Muslim proscription against depicting living creatures. You can just make out there two figures that look a little bit like lions or tigers. Maybe we could call them ligers. And these ligers are chasing deer. Now, apparently, the madrasa was commissioned by the Sultan of Samarkand. And the Sultan gave strict orders that the artwork above the archway must depict the mission of the madrasa's education. What we are seeing here is the pursuit of knowledge, ligers pursuing deers hungrily. But there's even more that meets the eye. Apart from the fact that these living creatures represent a seeming deviation from the orthodox Muslim proscription against representing animals and humans, there's something else here. You can see in the backs of the ligers faces. These are Zoroastrian symbols of enlightenment. So these are Parsi ligers in a Muslim madrasa. Even more strangely, look at the tile work immediately beneath the big arch. You'll see beautiful symmetrical patterns, but right in the middle is a shape that is a swastika, a Hindu swastika, which is above a strip that contains excerpts from the Quran. Parsi, Hindu, Muslim. You may be interested to know that the Registan Madrasa was commissioned by the Samarkand using a team of Indian artisans. And they devised, in sync with the Sultan's request, an image of education that was what we would now call secular. It not only represented the interdisciplinary mission of the madrasa, but also the interfaith conviction that no knowledge could be knowledge unless it got you outside of yourself, unless it linked you to other possibilities beyond yourself, beyond your community. This is very different from the world we live in right now. But this is something that I think running can open our eyes and our ears and our noses, all our senses to, that the world is much bigger than simply me, my community, my personal best, my achievement. Now, I do most of my running in India, and those of you who are watching in Hyderabad might recognize this picture, or at least where it's taken. I snapped this during an expedition during a visit to Hyderabad, and specifically to the Golconda Fort. This is taken at the Golconda Fort, looking out to Hyderabad. It was an amazing ascent, running up a staircase to the top of this extraordinary fort, the ruins of which are hardly ruins because so much is well preserved to this day. It was a reminder again of how we run through an environment that is much bigger than us. Running in the dry Deccan air was itself an extraordinary experience after the humidity of Delhi. But also Golconda, it dates back, of course, to the time of the Bahmani sultanates and the Golconda sultanate. But Golconda, we might think of it as a Muslim kingdom. It was, again, deeply secular. The Sultan commissioned work from philosophers who belonged to Hindu as well as Muslim and Parsi and Christian and even Jewish tradition. One of the poets who worked in Golconda just before it was captured by the Mughals in the late 17th century was a Jew from Persia named Sayyid Sarmad. This Jew was of Armenian origin. He had migrated from Persia, where he grew up, to India. He was a businessman, and he was a big fan of ghazals. He'd gone to Tata in Sindh, to a mushaira, where he heard a ghazal sung by a young Hindu boy named Abhay Chand, and he fell in love with the boy. They became lovers, and the two of them traveled all around India, from Lahore down to Hyderabad, a newly built city, in Golconda. And Sayyid Sarmad trained his boyfriend, Abhay Chand, in Hebrew and Persian. And Abhay Chand produced the first Persian translation of the Hebrew book of Genesis in Golconda. with the patronage of the Golconda Sultan. So you can see how this place was quite meaningful for me. It was the site of dialogue between so many different faiths. Said Samad and Abhay Chand, together as they roamed around India, were venerated as Sufi Qalandars, as Hindu yogis, and as Jewish rabbis. That again seems to be a long way away from the task of organizing a 10-kilometer run on Strava. But bear with me, I think it's intimately related. Here is another run I did that reminded me of just how much we are enthralled to the environment. This is an Uti at an altitude of many thousands of feet. I think it was about 7,300 feet. I was just doing my maintenance 10K daily run. After 3K, I was feeling absolutely dizzy. After 7K, I was feeling nauseous because, of course, I hadn't counted on how much the altitude would make a difference, let alone seeing an old ambassador car abandoned in the middle of nowhere. Here I am by Lake Sukhna in Chandigarh, right at the foothills of the Himalayas. This was an extraordinary experience running at sunrise. At a place right where the Gangetic Plains meet the Himalayas, the highest mountain range in the world. Another reminder that we live in terrain that is constantly changing. The Himalayas are growing every day. And even though we might think of the Himalayas as something ancient and timeless, as the site of sacred sanctuaries that have been there forever, of course, nothing remains the same. Earthquakes have been shaking the Gangetic Plains for a long time. Delhi has experienced 7 tremors in the last month, and there's talk that a big one might be coming soon. When you're running right at the border between the plains and the mountains, just as in Luxor, running at the border between river and desert, or in Kyoto, running at the border between Orange Arch and beautiful forest. You're reminded that we are constantly moving across borders, not only of space and conceptualization, but also time. We're constantly moving from the past into the present, into the future. Now, I do most of my running in Delhi, and here is the road up Rajpath. This is a road that might not exist for much longer, speaking of change, because the current central government is intent on digging up Rajpath and replacing it with a new central vista that will make it very difficult for joggers to run, let alone to have a view like this. Now, this photo gives you a rather skewed sense of what running in Delhi means to me, because it might give you the sense that I run entirely by myself, that running is a lonely activity, and nothing could be further from the truth. I'm always running with people. Here is one of my running groups. Satish on the left, Ravi next to him, Namrata, Deepti, Gautam. We often run in Lutyens, Delhi, particularly up Rajpath. The point is that even when I'm running by myself, I'm running with an environment. I'm running with the road underneath my feet. I'm running with the air that I inhale. I'm never by myself. Here I'm running with 2 friends, Manav and Harish, in Jahanpana in Delhi. But I'm also running with the trail. I'm working with the dirt under my feet. I'm working with the fresh air, unusually fresh that particular day, given how polluted Delhi tends to be. I'm running with the scent of bougainvillea in my nostrils. Here I am in Sanjeevan with my running group, Nakul, my coach, on my left, Satish and Gautam, running the day after Diwali, running, of course, with a mask. Even in Sanjeevan, with all its trees, the oxygen that the trees produce couldn't get rid of the massive pollution the day after. This was Choti Diwali. I think we had AQI of 380 that day. It was nothing compared to what came the following days. But again, the point is, I was running with an environment. Sometimes the environment I run with gives me fellow runners that aren't even human. Here is a shot of me running in the Siri Fort forest, very near where I live. It's one of my favorite running spots. It consists of numerous stray dogs who scare the hell out of many of the morning walkers. These dogs are actually very, very sweet. And once they're reassured that you're there simply to enjoy the environment, they'll often tag along with you. This group of 5 dogs ran the entire 10 kilometers with me when I went on this particular morning, so I had to record them at the end of my run. These guys didn't run with me. They're the monkeys of Lutyens Delhi, very near Rashtrapati Bhavan. But I have an interesting story to tell about them. My other running group, the Lutyens Road Runners, includes a very interesting runner, who'll go nameless, who one day when we were running past this flock of monkeys, just as we got to the alpha monkey, a really nasty piece of work, big, burly, with big fangs, he decided for some reason to run up to this monkey, yell at him from about 6 inches away, and then take off. The alpha monkey took a few seconds to respond. He realized he'd been accosted, affronted, and decided to seek revenge. I was running about 10 meters behind my fellow runner, and the alpha monkey decided to take it out on me. He bared his fangs, he chased after me at high speed, and I swear, I think Strava has the evidence to prove it, I ran the fastest 1 kilometer I've ever run. Sometimes the environment is not entirely friendly to runners, in other words. But the point is, you still have to work with it. You have to get outside yourself to run well. You can't be thinking simply about me, about my personal best. You need to be thinking about the terrain around you. Here's a photo from Samarkand that I think is beautifully illustrative of how we lead our lives. I snapped it during my run to the Registan, which I showed you before. It features a woman with a donkey, and the woman is carrying the reins of the donkey, but looking away from the donkey, just as the donkey is resolutely looking away from her. They're indifferent to each other. And I don't know quite what the woman is waiting for. Maybe it's someone in a car is going to turn up and give her something. Maybe she's waiting for someone to come and ride the donkey or take it away from her. But she's indifferent to all these vans and cars driving past her, just as they're indifferent to her. In other words, we have all these units: woman, animal, cars, vans, indifferent to each other. There's a tree here, and there's also me. We're all partially indifferent to each other, but of course, I'm looking at this woman and donkey. I'm just as much tethered to the woman and the donkey as the woman is tethered to the donkey. We're all part of the same scene. The problem is that we often look away from each other, forgetting that we're tethered. I think the scene reminds us both of how we can be indifferent to the fact that we are embedded in a world larger than us, but that we are also ineluctably, inescapably tethered to creatures, whether human, whether animal, whether plant, whether mineral. We are always tethered to a world bigger and beyond us. So to sum up, ecstatic running is not just happy running. It's also running that gets you outside yourself. It makes you remember you're part of a world much bigger than you. It makes you realize that the individual I is not the be-all and end-all of running. You're running not just for you, or rather, even if you think you're running just for you, every run entails a conversation with a world much bigger than you. John Donne, the poet, said, "No man is an island. No man or woman is an island, even, especially when they're running." We are always intimately connected to an ecology outside us that includes other people, other communities, other species, other physical matter, other possibilities of being. The word education literally means to lead out, to get outside yourself. And education should be an ecstatic experience. That may seem utterly counterintuitive in India, the land of board exams. There couldn't be a more apposite phrase than board exams, because our education system is designed to make us bored. It's designed to make us mug up and think only about ourselves, the grade we're going to get, how we can advance our careers. But a true education, like the madrasa of the Registan in Samarkand, is going to lead us outside ourselves to other disciplines, to other communities, to other ways of being, to a bigger world. I think running provides us with an opportunity for that education. I'd like to think that my running groups have given me that education. Here in Delhi, I've run with groups that include Hindu, Sikh, Christian, Jew, Parsi, and with people who I might not otherwise have anything to do with, yet there is an extraordinary experience of solidarity across boundaries of cultural, religious, even linguistic difference, when we're on a run together, somehow negotiating the same terrain. You know that extraordinary experience, I'm sure most of you have had it, of ecstasy. And I'm not talking about the endorphin run, the endorphin rush. I'm talking about that moment where, after all the chat, the banter at the beginning of a run, you fall into silence and you suddenly notice that everyone in the group is running in sync. You're running at the same pace. Even your breathing is in sync. You are all working collectively as a group bigger than any I to negotiate the terrain around you. That's what it means, getting outside. Getting outside not only your house and your head, but also yourself, your community, your way of being. Thank you very much, and I hope we've got time for lots of conversation now. I'll stop sharing my screen so we can be more intimate with each other. Gupta, are you there? Oh, Chaitanya.
Professor, thank you so much for that talk. And frankly, when I started off, I was like not sure what we're getting into, but this is amazing. Like all the pictures, all the travel you took us through. The geography travel was really awesome, but the fact that there was the emotional travel that you tried to put us through, and hopefully when I go to my next run, or maybe all of us go to our next run, we'll try to see if we can figure it out, but I'm sure it's not that easy because we're so tuned to ourselves even today. So skipping that, actually, I should thank this group of runners, Hyderabad runners, for this, because the journey of this particular series of talks, which is, I mean, I've been attending these for a few days now, weeks now. We started off with checking your heart a few weeks ago, caring for your heart last week, and running with your heart with you. This is awesome. The journey is really awesome. So I'll not waste more time. I will ask some questions. This is Satish who's asked a question. He's asked a couple of questions. I'll put all of them to you so that you can answer it whichever sequence you choose to. He's asking if the world of running complements your craft of literature and storytelling. From what I see, it does, but I think your answer would be better. And he's also asking, what has been your biggest lesson or insight that running has provided to you? Right. One last question from him is, will he still travel the world with the same, or will you still travel the world with the same gusto as before? Or do you think something has changed with the current situation?
Thank you, Satish. So first of all, yes, I think there is a connection between my writing and my running. Both involve a lot of discipline to crank out a certain amount every day. Both involve recognizing that it's not going to work every day, You can't aim for perfection every time you step out. Both involve resigning yourself to the certainty of uncertainty. No matter how much you try and plan a run, you know that unexpected things are going to happen mid-run. This is especially the case when you're running in a new city that you've never run in before. In terms of how much the world has changed, I'm not sure I can answer that question with certainty at this point, because we still don't know what the world is going to look like after everything eases up. Many of us are blithely assuming that everything will go back to normal. I don't think that's the case. I think that we're going to find new normals, but they're not going to be the same as before. I know that many marathon events have been postponed. They're already suggesting new dates for them, but I think it's going to be increasingly hard for us in the foreseeable future to have the kind of mass marathon, half marathon events that we've had in the past. And I actually think that's not a bad thing. I know that, speaking just personally for myself, as much as I enjoy training for events and enjoy the experience of pushing myself to run harder and faster, and have derived a great deal of pleasure from personal bests, I don't want to throw those out the window. There's a certain joy of running that can be lost when we put blinkers on and focus only on that. If we're training only for events, then I think we lose a horizon of possibility that running for the sheer joy of it can remind us of. And so I think as much as I've gnashed my teeth during this time of lockdown, I've also found ways of running, even though it's in my colony. For 75 days in a row, despite the RWA, I've been running circles in my colony. And I've had to get out of a certain mindset where I need outside distractions to ensure that my run is an enjoyable one. I've had to set myself certain sort of mental tasks. I've actually found that the experience of running has become much more meditative when I'm running the same 2-kilometer loop over and over again. I'm spending much more time in the company of my breath. I'm much more aware of my footfall, where it's landing, how it's landing. Everything that I was, by the way, a practicer of Buddhist meditation for many years. I stopped after my sister died because some 17 years ago, because I just couldn't access the pleasure that meditation had given me. But interestingly, running has taken me back to a very meditative step of allowing myself to be in a moment, not trying to control it too much, just listening, receiving what my physical encounter with the world is giving me. So that actually has been one of the biggest learnings of running in general. But I think the current lockdown has sort of helped me clinch that. What's going to happen in the future? I think we're going to see a lot more socially distanced running. I'm going to be doing a socially distanced run, my first run outside the colony tomorrow morning in Lutyens, Delhi, with a running group friend. We'll be running 3 meters apart from each other. I guess there'll be less chat during this run, but it'll be interesting to see what kind of synergy is achieved when two people right from the start have agreed to run a distance from each other. Because I suspect it won't be that different from what happens at the midpoint of a run when you are often running in socially distanced fashion, yet you're feeling intimately connected to the people running around you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So we have a next question from Sagarika. I think this is very specifically for you. I think it's a very personal question. May I know what's your next run? What are the exotic destinations that you have put in your list, your bucket list?
Yep. Sorry, could you repeat that? There was just a glitch at my end.
Sorry. So what she's asking is, what is your plan? What are the plans for your next run, and what are those exotic destinations that you have put in your bucket list for your run?
Kya karein, bhai? There's not going to be much travel for a while. I love traveling, but I've had to realize that one of these old cliches is actually true. You don't have to travel to the other side of the world to travel a distance. Even running in my colony 2 kilometers, I've been doing a lot of traveling. But I most enjoy running in old cities with histories of some kind. I had been hoping to go this summer to Kyrgyzstan to run in the Fergana Valley. I'm writing a book right now on the Silk Road, and my mother, in fact, had lived in the Fergana Valley from 1941 to 1946, and I was hoping to run in her footsteps in Anjana and Uzgen, the town where she lived. That's not going to happen for the foreseeable future. So right now, I'm just delighted that I'm going to be able to run in Lutyens Delhi tomorrow. So that's good enough for me.
Have a good run tomorrow. We are actually beyond our time, so we'll still extend a little bit and ask a question. So there's Rajesh Vecha, who's asking a question about how it was running in the USA. Was it very different? We are assuming it's very different, and we'd like to hear about it.
Interesting question. You see, I'd run as a teenager and in my early 20s. And I pretty much stopped running the entire time I was in the US. I did run a bit. It was mostly on a treadmill in the gym. I got most of my exercise in the gym. But in the US, it was partly because I was living in upstate New York where the weather was so cold that for much of the year it was impossible to run outside. It was partly because it was very hilly terrain there. I was in Ithaca, New York, so running was a bit of a test, particularly if you were leading something of a couch potato life, as I often was. But more than that, I think American life is very much atomized. Americans are very friendly people. If there are any Americans listen, maaf kijiye for what I'm about to say. Americans are very friendly people, but the kind of in-your-face intimacy that is part and parcel of living in India is absolutely foreign in America. Americans live in houses, unless you're in a city like New York, Americans live in houses that are at a light distance from each other. To go anywhere in America, you get in a car and you drive. And I think there's a way in which I'd internalize that mindset so that to go running, I would hop in my car and I'd drive to the gym and I'd run on a treadmill. It was actually only when I started visiting India on a regular basis, 2001, I started spending every summer in India. And I met up with a friend in India who said, let's go running in Lodi Gardens. And that's what started me running outside again. One thing led to another. I became part of a regular running group. It was one of the reasons, in fact, why I immigrated to India, knowing that outside running with a group would be one of the pleasures that I could enjoy here. Also, the friendships that I developed with the people in the group was part of the bait. I know that if I were for some reason to move back to America, I would continue to run outside. I can't shake off what I've learned here. But I think that there is a way, even though America is the land of sort of high-tech running equipment, nutrition supplements, etc. It's the land of the Boston Marathon. It's the land of Runners Magazine and so on. I actually think India is a more congenial place to do the kind of running that I love. Despite the pollution, despite the potholes, despite the alpha monkeys outside Rashtrapati Bhavan. Because India always reminds me that I'm living in a world that's bigger than me. America affords you the illusion that life is all about you. And that's one of the reasons why I left, to be honest.
Wow, that's just not expecting that deep an answer, but that's awesome. So there's one more question. I think it connects to the previous question, and I would like to add a little bit of my question to that too. So this is a question which asks about what are some of the social things that you've noticed while running across India? right? So we've gone from the US to India, and you already said that you've run across many cities in India, and you've noticed the patterns, social patterns, and there might be some running cultures you observe, saying, okay, this is how people run differently, right? So that's a question we'd like you to answer.
Well, I think I've noticed a change over the 12 or so years, 13 years that I've been running in India. When I was first running, I was running in exclusively male groups. More and more women have started running, which is wonderful to see, but it's also changed the interpersonal dynamic so much for the better. I think there's a way in which all male running groups have often sort of replicated an all male ethos of the workplace, of intense competitiveness. There's a certain kind of banter that can sometimes be enjoyable, but can also be, you know, sort of borderline abusive. And it's not that men become nicer people necessarily around women, but I think they're reminded of certain privilege limits, and it's good for men to be reminded of those. But there's something that I've always enjoyed about running in India. I mean, let's face it, most of the people I run with come from very privileged English-speaking backgrounds. But I've been noticing more and more the people I'm running with, people who don't necessarily speak English well or speak English at all. And when I started running in India, I thought that would have been an impossible deterrent. It's not been. There's a way in which, again, it sounds like a horrible cliche, but running is a language that transcends communities of religion, of culture, of language. Yes, we may bring all sorts of eccentricities and oddities that are specific to our community to the starting line. But once we start running together, something else happens. This is something I talked about in the extract that I shared with the Hyderabad runners from my book, The First Firangis, where I talked about how an Ethiopian migrant to the Ahmednagar Sultanate, Malik Ambar, he started off life in Ahmednagar as a slave, but he became a general and then basically the Grand Vizier of Ahmednagar. And he put together an extraordinary multicultural army of Ethiopian soldiers, Maratha soldiers, Muslims, Hindus, also Karnataka people, Telugu speakers, Kannada speakers. He put them all together in an army, and this army somehow managed to repel the might of Jahangir and the Mughals year after year after year. And why? Because they lived in the wilds of the Deccan, and they had to run over the Deccan together. They learned to run up and down the hills, over creeks, etc. And they had to somehow overcome their cultural and religious differences to function, their linguistic differences to function not only as a fighting unit, but as a unit that depended on each other for their livelihood, for their welfare. Now, I've experienced something of that with the running groups, the various running groups I've been privileged to be part of here, that it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. Once you start running, there is something that happens. It's almost some sixth sense that gets activated between runners. You're speaking the same language.
Okay, so this one question, this is something that I wanted to ask. Again, you might want to put that however briefly or in detail as you want. If you were to given a choice to put one city, one weather, one emotion, and one person together for your run, what would that be?
Oh God, that's impossible to answer because I always love a new city. And running in a new city. There's no better way of getting to know a city than on foot, running through it. You get to know it with your body in a way that you can't from looking at a map or driving through it in a car. But I love running in my Delhi, Meri Sadi Delhi. I love running in Lutyens Delhi. I'm horrified that at the thought, I'll just make a little plug here. I'm horrified at the thoughts that Lutyens Delhi is going to be dug up in order to create new buildings for the sake of a certain sense of what a capital city should look like. There are many things that the British left behind that were terrible. But one thing that I'm very grateful for are those beautiful wide tree-covered boulevards of Delhi that traverse terrain that include so many species. You meet donkeys, dogs, monkeys, as well as runners, and so many wonderful old buildings, whether it's the Lutyens bungalows or Purana Killa, the dargahs, the maqbaras, and Lodi Gardens, etc. So for me, nothing beats the thrill of a 25K loop through Lutyens Delhi. But that said, I am exhilarated, ecstatic every time I get outside myself, outside my city, and run somewhere new. So if you have good suggestions about where I should run, I'm all for it.
We will send them out for you. We have time for one last question. This is from Satish Raju again. This is a different Satish. So what he's asking, and I'm assuming this is going to be really philosophical and literary. So how would the world be if Shakespeare had been running? How different would the world be if Shakespeare had been running?
It would be infinitely less rich because we probably wouldn't have the plays. Unlike Haruki Murakami, I don't think Shakespeare would have thrived on a diet of daily running. We never had a play called What I Think About When I Think About Running to the Globe Theatre. Yeah, let's be grateful that Shakespeare was the way Shakespeare was and he wrote the plays that he did, and that I can think about them as I run. But I'm also grateful for the fact that I live in a world where I can run the way that I do, thinking about Shakespeare as I think about running.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Professor. I think that's the amount of time we have for asking questions. Thanks so much for this session. It's been a beautiful, beautiful session and a lot of learnings personally for me. I'm sure everybody's learned from it. And we're going to figure out if we're going to put it to really, what do you call it? We're going to experience it tomorrow. We'll figure it out and we'll let you know if we do. Okay,
well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you. I realized I went over time. I was really scared when I did a dry run of the talk. It only lasted 12 minutes, and I realized I ended up talking quite a bit longer than that. So my apologies, maaf kijiye, but it was a pleasure to be connected with you all. And thank you for your questions.
There were some really, really wonderful extra minutes you took us through. Thank you for that. I'll hand the session over to Giri now. For the closing. Great, please take over.
Yes, yeah. So thank you so much, Chaitanya, for the Q&A facilitation. Very nice questions from Satish, Rajesh, and Sagarika. Very nice answers. Just as very quite inspiring and very very good answers. And so, friends, that was quite an inspiring and informative last 1 hour that we've had with Professor Harris. We hope you all have enjoyed as much as I did, and we all did in organizing it as well. So a few key insights that I gathered from Professor Harris' talk. So I realized that Professor Harris is Dil Se Indian, and I could see his Indianized Hindi words, and because his interaction with Indians and connection with literature, I could see a lot of that. So you defined, getting outside, the ecstasy of running. Ecstasis is, very good to know. Again, the literature side of it. Yeah, you carried your phone not just for Strava, for logging your runs, but you're very active in taking the photos, and all the I could see all the pictures that you have taken across all the places that you have gone through. Quite amazing, and there were like places and photographs that you have taken, quite drooling, and we were like feeling as if we would run there, hopefully very soon. So you've taken, quite a few examples of your own place in New Zealand, where you talked about the Rainbow Bridge, the Oakland lava field, Mount Eden, Tokyo, Kyoto from Japan, Egypt, and the Nile River, the Kalyan Mosque in Uzbekistan, Registan Desert, the madrasas there. Finally, you showed us the Golconda Fort, where we also actually had a Hyderabad Runners Go Heritage, Go Heritage Run supported by Hyderabad Runners. So, and quite a bit of history that you have taken behind that, which maybe some of us may also have not known some of that. So, we are very interesting, and some of your photographs from Ooty, Chandigarh, and finally, the place where you actually are running now, Delhi, Rajpath, and your Delhi running group, and your connection with the environment, and your talk about running with the environment and not getting away from it, and taking the examples of the dogs, monkeys, and donkeys on the road, and it's quite interesting, and the connection that you're making with the environment around, not just people, but also the trees and the nature and everything. Quite interesting. So getting you outside of yourself is something that I could lightly get more about understanding myself, and I truly believe in it. Understanding myself is the first thing before we try to understand the others, right? So and that's when we can try to understand the nature. And you took the example of the education, how it should be starting from understanding myself. So I could see your connection to the literature, in all the question and answer session that you had. And of course, I see all the books that you have just behind you, and quite inspirational, talk that you had all this time. And one thing I really like about you is connecting Shakespeare with everything, so including running, and it's quite interesting. So I quite really enjoyed it, and our deepest gratitude for taking your time to share all your experiences in all these places and a lot of learnings with us today. And again, I thank all our audience, our fellow runners. Thank you for spending time with us today. Of course, we've spent a little over time, and you may have had a lot of other things to do, but I really appreciate for being with us today and giving priority to the webinar today. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask any more questions that you have for Professor Harris in the comment section. We will definitely work it out and try to get back to you the answers. The recording of this event will be available on our Hyderabad Runners Facebook page. So please do come back to watch it again if you want to, or share it again, share it on your profile so that others can also benefit out of this. A lot of insights that we don't get to see all these kind of experiences very much. So we will get back again next Saturday with yet again another expert, another inspiring, intriguing topic for you. So just as we do our long runs, Sunday long runs, SLRs that we do every Sunday morning. So keep this also week after week. You can fix your Saturday evenings, 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. for Beyond the Track webinars. So we will have similar webinars like this, very interesting. So just we hope to see you like this every Saturday. Until then, this is Giri from Hyderabad Runners signing off. Stay home, stay safe, stay fit, and stay healthy. Bye-bye for now.